We are ready to roll. So good Tuesday evening. It's Tuesday. Tuesday evening in Utah, Salt Lake City, America. Glad to have you guys on board. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome into the show. It's Tuesday night. And I'm absolutely buzzing right now. I am so hyped. And the reason why I am hyped right now is because Bruce Springsteen kicked off his Hope and Dreams, Welcome to the Land of Hope and Dreams tour in Minneapolis tonight. And he streamed, it doesn't sound like much, but he streamed the first 2 songs of the show live on YouTube. I was parked right in front of my television watching the show as it unfolded, and he kicked off the show with probably the 2 best songs he could have kicked off this tour with. Started off with War, what is it good for? Perfect, and then straight into Born in the USA. And I'm just vibrating with excitement because I get to see this tour 2 weeks from Thursday, and I cannot wait. I am so excited for that. So anyway, that's what I'm super pumped about tonight. And that's my good news for the evening. But we're about to get underway, talk about some Utah politics. We've got a lot to talk about. We've got some poll numbers in the 1st Congressional District. I'll break those down for you. They're kind of what we expected, but it also talks about but there's also a few things that we can surmise about maybe the parameters of this race. So we're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about, it's our first chance to get together and talk about Prop 4 not making the ballot. It got knocked off the ballot with the signature removal process. What happens next? Where do we go from here? We can talk about that tonight. We can talk about orphaned voters. I did a big analysis basically showing you where the population shifted to under this new congressional map. We're going to talk about that tonight. We can also talk about the Supreme Court of the United States not technically striking down the Colorado ban on conversion therapy, but what does that mean for Utah? Because Utah has also banned conversion therapy. Well, the experts seem to think that Utah's ban is going to, it doesn't fit with what the Supreme Court ruled today. So we've got all that on the table tonight, plus whatever you want to talk about. If you have any questions, any comments, you want to chime in, leave it in the chat, and I'll get to it as soon as I can. But there's a lot going on. Politics are starting to heat up. We've got the county convention circuit starting. State conventions are just a few weeks away. And we are getting into the thick of it. Let's start off with this comment. Gabriel on YouTube says, is my dog doing better? She has bounced back a lot better than I thought she was going to. If you're just joining us, if you're not aware what's happening, my border collie Murphy, probably my best friend in the world, just beside my wife, she's almost 10, and last year they discovered she had a pretty aggressive tumor in her nose. It had actually filled up one side of her nasal cavity, gone around the back, and was going into the other side of the nasal cavity, and it actually had started to it was a very aggressive tumor, and it had started to go into her skull. We did radiation. They got the tumor out. But as part of the radiation, they warned us that she might be susceptible to seizures. A couple of weekends ago, she had some really bad seizures. They were really frightening. She spent the night in the hospital. She's on anti-seizure medicine. For the first couple of days, you could tell that she was not all there, but slowly she has been returning to her old self. Not 100%, but patrol has resumed in the backyard. We call her the ranch dog because she would prefer to be outside. She's not an indoor dog. She's a little more indoor now. She actually sleeps near my wife, and that's a change. My wife is working on her PhD, and so when she's downstairs working at her desk, Murphy sleeps next to her, which she has never done before. But she has returned to some of her old habits. The patrol in the backyard. She doesn't ranch as much as she did, but slowly but surely she's recovered a lot better than I thought she would. It's still a day by day thing. We know eventually things are probably going to take a turn because there's cancer in her skull, in her brain, and so I'm just thankful I get a little more time with her. So thank you for asking that, Gabriel. I appreciate it. Let's see. What do you have here? Lady of the Great Salt Lake says, I want to talk about the big art installation in Memory Grove to bring awareness to the Great Salt Lake. I've seen some of that on social media. I haven't gone, but it looks awesome. It kind of reminds me of the Sphere in Las Vegas. So that's kind of cool. Lady of the Great Salt Lake says, I have to dash soon to volunteer for that, but it's always good to see you talking politics. Let me know, give me some information, either drop it into DM or let me know how long that's going, and I'll try to get out there to see it. So it'll be interesting. But thank you for chiming in. Elliot Nutter says, were you able to go to the No Kings protest? We had about 350 people here in Cedar City. I was unable to go. I had some other things on my plate on that Saturday that I couldn't get out of. So I was unable to go, but it was bigger than the last one, and it was bigger than the one before. But yeah, it looked pretty amazing. It looked bigger than the last one, and it looked bigger than the first one. And that's encouraging because, I love America. I love this democracy. I love what I love what I grew up. I love the place that I grew up in. I love the country that I grew up in. And it is heartening to see so many people stepping up to defend democracy, stepping up to say that what's going on, it's clearly not what the founding fathers thought should happen. All right. If you have any other questions or comments, please leave them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as possible. But the first thing that I want to talk about tonight are these poll numbers that we just got in the 1st congressional district. Now, a couple of caveats. First of all, it was not a very big sample size. It was only 381 likely Democratic voters in the 1st district. It's also got a pretty big margin of error, plus or minus 5%. So keep that in mind as we look at that. And when we look at some of the crosstabs, those sample sizes are going to get smaller, meaning the margin of error goes up. I have not calculated those, but we can glean a couple of things about, I guess, the parameters of this race from this poll. You can see the numbers here. Don't know is at 25%, which is significant. But this is what you would expect to see. At this point in the race, it's all it's mostly name ID. It's mostly name ID, and Ben McAdams has the highest name ID. We can see that in the in this polling, and we can see it in the crosstabs. And I'll get to those questions in a second. But as you can see right here, Ben McAdams is at 36%, Nate Bluin is at 23%, probably the two most well-known candidates in the race. Now, as you dig into these numbers, and again, remember, we're going to have smaller sample sizes. It's already a small sample size of the 381 likely voters in the Democratic primary. But as we look at some of these crosstabs, that sample size is going to get smaller, and that will make the margin of error go up exponentially. So keep that in mind, but we can still glean some information from that. So gender breaks out pretty much along the same lines. Ben McAdams, 37%. This is among women voters. Nate Bluin at 24%. Lopez Chavez and Rabi at 6, leaving Muhammad at 1, don't know at 26. So it pretty much mirrors what they found in the top lines. And kind of the same thing. McAdams 35, Nate Bluin 22, Lopez Chavez at 10, Rabi at 8, leaving Muhammad at 3. And again, don't know at 23%. Now, here's the first divide that I saw. And it is a generational divide. Voters under 45 break slightly for Nate Bluin. 28% of voters who are under the age of 45 said they would vote for Nate Bluin. 21% said they would vote for McAdams, but 30% say that they don't know. Voters over the age of 45 that's a significant margin for McAdams there. That's a 26-point margin. Even if the sample size is smaller and the margin of error is higher, that's still a significant margin there for McAdams, 46 to 20. And again, 21% here, as you can see, are undecided. What we're seeing is what we're seeing is that's the first divide, a generational divide. You've got your older voters going for McAdams, the younger voters going for Bluin. And that tracks with this next part that we're going to look at. Because if you look at the ideological breakdown, and I don't know, they did not say in the crosstabs that they sent, so I don't know if this is self-identified, if they asked if you would consider yourself, there are three categories here: very liberal, somewhat liberal, and moderate. I'm surprised we didn't see somewhat conservative, very conservative. But again, this poll was conducted by Data for Progress. That's a Democratic polling firm. But so keep in mind this generational divide, where you've seen younger voters slightly breaking for Bluin, older voters significantly breaking for McAdams. We're going to see that again in this ideological divide. Very liberal voters, significant break for Bluin, 38% of voters, and I'm assuming that they're self-identified, that they describe themselves as very lib. They're 38%. McAdams at 21% there again, 28% don't know. Now here, it's going to flip. When we get to somewhat liberal, McAdams is at 34, and Bluin is at 17. Lopez Chavez at 11, Kathleen Rabi at 10, and Muhammad at 4. So they're splitting the other part of, or the other part of those who have a preference. Again, 23% are undecided. But when you get to moderates, they break hard for McAdams, which makes sense. McAdams has made his entire political... McAdams made his first term in Congress, his time as Salt Lake County mayor, his time in the legislature as a moderate, someone who's willing to work across the aisle, bipartisan. So this makes sense. 70% for McAdams, 9% for Bluin, 16% don't know. So, and we will come back to that in a second. But as you can see, there's a couple of divides that you can see immediately out of these numbers. The first one is younger voters for Bluin, older voters for McAdams. And then again, you can see it in progressive voters, very liberal, voting, breaking for Bluin, which makes sense because that's how he's positioned himself in this race. And then somewhat liberal and moderate voters breaking for McAdams. Gabriel on YouTube says, how does this polling data map onto the demographics of the district? Good question. I'll have to check that out, and it gives me something to write on because I do have access to that data. I just don't have it at my fingertips. But stay tuned. I will have that for you. Elliot Nutter says, Nate Bluin is my preferred based on the candidates, but Ben isn't too bad, just more low key. Here's the thing that is, that is, this is why the ideological divide that we're seeing could be a major factor in this race, in this primary. And we've talked about it before. This is not a closed primary. It is not just Democrats who will be voting. It is any registered voter in the 1st Congressional District can vote in this primary, even Republicans, so long as that is the only primary that they vote in. So you're going to get Democrats voting in this primary. You're going to get independents voting in this primary. And yes, you are going to get Republicans voting in this primary. And for the most part, if you think about independents, for the most part, they are, independents in Utah are skew somewhat conservative. They skew moderate to conservative in general. Again, I'll have to see what the actual demographic makeup and what the ideological makeup of the district is, because I do have access to that data through L2, which is a data warehousing company that gives me access to their data that is really helpful. But when you have an open primary and it's not just Democrats, that means candidates that are closer to the middle tend to do better. Again, I'm not making a prediction, but this poll seems to map out what you would expect to see in that kind of race. It's not a closed primary like the Republicans, where you have to be a registered Republican. And even then, when you look at the Republican primary, for the most part, it is the more moderate candidate, the more centrist candidate who wins in recent elections. Spencer Cox over Phil Lyman, John Curtis over Trent Staggs and those opponents. That's how it tends to play out. When you get into a primary election, you're going to get a larger universe of voters. So if anyone who thinks that you can win this primary by simply appealing to progressive voters, you're not going to be able to do it. I don't think that there's enough of them out there. So give me your reaction to that, and we can talk about that. Let's talk to Nathan Detroit. He's watching on Twitch tonight. Nathan is one of my subscribers at Utah Political Watch. You can subscribe at utahpolitics.news. Nathan writes, in CD1, a candidate needs 7,000 signatures from registered Democrats to qualify, correct? How big is the pool of potential siders in CD1, and how many could conceivably qualify for the primary with signatures? They actually changed the rules on that for this year and this year only, this election cycle and this year only. And the reason why is because they moved the filing dates back. And so because they thought that the map was going to change. And so you can get signatures from any registered Democrat statewide. So it's not broken out by district right now. And that goes the same for Republicans as well. They don't have to just get them from the district that they're running in. In the 2028 election, we will go back to those rules. But in this one, you don't have to do that. Packed Fridge on YouTube says, I don't know if we can call Cox a moderate anymore. Compared to Phil Lyman, though, right? Compared to Phil Lyman. Vote for Stephen Burt says, independents are skewing younger and younger, and assuming they're also more progressive and liberal, the assumption that independents voting in the primary would cut in favor of moderate may not hold. I'm just going to rely on what Rick Wilson says. People have been saying that younger voters are going to show up and tip an election for years and years and years, and it never happens. It never happens. So until it happens, I'm just going to, the independent voters might be skewing more liberal, but they don't show up to vote for the most part. Debbie C on Instagram says, any update on how Lyman is with his signature gathering? He has, they haven't shown up on the website yet. At least I don't think. I haven't checked today's totals. Let me look at that. I do know that he and his people have turned in a bunch of packets. They were talking about, I heard from someone who was also turning in their packets at one of the county clerks, and they said his people came in and turned in a large number of packets. Right now, he does not have any verified listed on the Lieutenant Governor's website. Celeste Maloy has 1,049. The deadline for them to turn in their signatures is a week from Friday. You have to turn them in the Friday, the last business day that is at least 2 weeks before your convention. So that means this Friday is the deadline for candidates in a lot of conventions. I know Davis County, all of their candidates have to turn in their signatures, and Salt Lake County the same. They have to turn in their signatures by the end of the by the end of the day on Friday, the 3rd of April. So that's something to watch. I know that a lot of candidates, a few candidates here and there have started to qualify. Others are getting closer to qualifying. And here's an update for you. Bob Stevenson, who is challenging Trevor Lee in House District 16 for the Republican nomination, he has turned in enough signatures as of today to qualify for the ballot. So he cannot be eliminated at convention and Davis County Convention. Some funky things tend to happen there at the Davis County Convention. I remember a couple of years ago where the then chair, Tina Horlocker, literally changed the rules of the convention as the convention was going on, as voting was being counted, to save a signature gathering candidate from being to save a convention only candidate from being eliminated at the convention. Somehow they decided that they were lowering the signature threshold. It was pretty bonkers. So it's a good thing that Bob Stevenson has got his signatures in. So there will be, unless Stevenson somehow wins the vote at convention, he will be in a primary against Trevor Lee, for those of you who are watching. Stephen Bird says, are you saying independents don't show up or young people don't show up? I'm saying young people don't show up. I guess I wasn't clear with that. So young people are not showing up. Abigail Treasure, who's also in that House District 16, said the Davis County Republicans just disqualified a delegate over voter registration. They snuck in as an independent. Yeah, that's a party rule. And I'm going to have a story tomorrow morning about the party rule that says you have to be registered as a Republican for a full year before you can run for office. Remember I wrote that last week where they knocked Trina Christensen out of the state school board race? Well, we've got an update, and it's interesting, and nobody's commenting about it. But I have the goods, so I'll have that story for you tomorrow. We call that a bit of a tease. Michael O'Malley says, years ago I was in a meeting with a number of Davis County politicians, and one of them joked during a discussion, what's a Democrat? Exactly. That happens. But Davis County has become sort of one of the two beating hearts of the extreme wing of the Utah Republican Party. Davis County is one of them, and Washington County too, but for very different reasons. And that's probably a story that I need to write one of these times. Let's see. Packed Fridge says, any insight why Derek Kitchen bowed out? Who are some of the other folks that could run that are taking a pass? I'm guessing Kitchen just didn't see a path to victory. There's 7 Democrats in that race. There would have been 8. McAdams has already qualified for the primary. Bluin has likely qualified. He says that they have enough signatures. I'm just waiting for the Lieutenant Governor's office to update that on the website. According to the latest numbers, Lopez Chavez is getting close to qualifying. She has She has 3,300 signatures so far. That number really hasn't moved, so I'm suspecting that she has more. Liban Mohammed has 3,200. Kathleen Reeby is at 726. Michael Farrell 1278. Nate Bluen, as his campaign says that they are over, they're really only a couple of dozen signatures away from officially qualifying. So you're going to have at least 2 people in that primary. I would suspect 4, maybe 5. And so if you get 4 or 5 people in that primary, you're going to get a winner. It's possible that you will get a winner who has only 40% of the vote, 35% of the vote. And that's when this polling, you can throw that out the window, because anything can happen. That's when it comes down to who shows up to vote. Alex Forsyth on TikTok says, do young people not show up because they tend to work retail service jobs and can't take work off? I just think that there's just not a lot of passion for politics. It's changing. I'm seeing a lot of young people getting involved in politics. But here in Utah, the young people who are getting involved in politics are primarily Republicans, because it's a Republican Party. You know, I know the Democrats have been waiting for years and years and years for the demographics to flip, but they haven't. So, you know, your politically active young people tend to be conservatives. So anyway, let's take a look at a couple of things that I pulled out of this poll. If you look at the favorability ratings, that was very interesting to me. And that also talks about, that also tells me, name ID, which is what a lot of these polls are at this point in the race. If you look at the net favorability ratings, that's where they ask voters, do you have a very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, or very unfavorable opinion of the candidate, and then you subtract the two, then you get your net favorable rating. McAdams, no surprise, he leads with a plus 47 net favorable. Bluen is at plus 35, Reeby at plus 22, Lopez Chavez at plus 19, and Liban Mohammed at plus 12. Okay, they all have net positive approval ratings, which is good. The bad thing is there's also a question on this poll that says, don't have enough information to form an opinion. That's essentially what the question was. Only 19% answered that about McAdams. He's got the highest name recognition, which makes sense. He's been in Utah politics for a long time. He was in Congress and then lost to Burgess Owens. He hasn't been, front and center getting a lot of attention, but he does have name ID. And then after that, it just drops off for the rest of the field. Bluen, it had 46% of respondents said they didn't know enough about him to form an opinion. Reeby was at 64% who didn't know enough about her. Lopez Chavez was at 66%, and Mohammed was at 80%. And so right there, that's the uphill battle that a lot of them are going to be running against. And now that number right there is where campaign cash, it comes into play. That's where it's important, because that's how you message to people. You have to have the resources to message to voters. McAdams doesn't need to introduce himself to voters. They know who he is. They formed an opinion of him. They like him. He's got that plus 47 net favorability. McAdams, he's a known commodity. Bluen has got some work to do. If 46% of voters in the district say that they don't know enough about Nate Bluen to form an opinion, he's got to do some work to introduce himself to those voters. And that's an uphill battle that he has to fight. He's going to be in it all the way through the primary in June, so he's got some time. But he's going to need resources to do that. He's got some, he's reeled in some endorsements that could help. But endorsements don't win elections. Bluen has got to find a way to introduce himself to voters. And everybody else, they've got a bigger hill to climb. And I'm really surprised at Reeby's numbers, with 64% saying they don't know enough about her, because she ran for Congress previously. That's very interesting to me. So those are the parameters that we're playing with right now with the 1st Congressional District. It's one poll. Polls are not predictive. Polls measure noise. Polls tell you where we were at a particular point in time. It doesn't tell you where we are now. It tells you where we are. So where we were. So keep that in mind. These polls are not predictive. They're just a snapshot of where we were at one point. Gabriel on YouTube says, isn't Senator Bluen notably ineffective at getting legislation passed? Yes, he runs messaging-led legislation. He runs legislation that he frankly knows is not going to pass. And here's the secret. Democrats on the Hill only pass legislation that Republicans want them to pass. There's, in the past, I would say at least 8 years, maybe 10, no Democratic piece of legislation has not passed unless the Republicans have signed off on it. They have not muscled something through. The last couple of ones that I can remember, Patrice Arendt got rid of the voting on the got rid of straight ticket voting right before she left the legislature, which was a big deal. You couldn't just go into the ballot box and click, I vote for all the Republicans. That took a lot of tenacity, but she was able to get that through. Rebecca Chavez Houck got same-day voter registration passed. So those are examples of that are few and far between. But yes, Nate Bluen does not get legislation passed up on the Hill. And I don't think, I'm sure he would like to see his legislation get passed, but it is very progressive, the things that he has proposed. JK on YouTube says, being ineffective at passing legislation in our crooked legislature, I don't think of as a negative, and the margins in Washington, D.C. are starkly different. Yes, if Nate Bluen somehow gets into Congress, whoever gets into Congress, it is a different, a different ball game for them completely. Because the trends right now say that the Democrats are going to be in charge in the House. I know that Kalshi is saying that there's a chance that the Democrats could take the Senate. That's a betting app, folks. Kalshi is not predictive at all. Don't pay attention to that. Let's see. Nathan Detroit says, we're constantly downplaying the impact of D's registered as Republicans voting in primaries. Even with an open Democratic primary, what is the motivation to argue that Republicans will have a substantial impact on the CD1 Democratic primary? Is it just a numbers game? Well, first of all, Nathan, and you've been on all of my live streams, so you know I say this, we are downplaying Democrats voting in the Republican primary because there's no evidence that a lot of Democrats voted in the Republican primary. The people who switched their party affiliation to vote in the Republican primaries are independents who want to vote in the Republican primary because it's closed. We have not seen a primary like this in a long time. We have not seen a competitive Democratic primary, and this is a competitive primary, and it's going to be an open primary. So I don't know if anybody can really predict what we're going to see. And we're taking a lot of faith in this poll, or I guess the people, I reported on the poll because the numbers are interesting. But if you want to try to draw definitive conclusions from this poll, you got to put a lot of faith in the fact that Data for Progress got their sample right. Because if they didn't get their sample right, this poll means nothing. You remember, I forget which race it was. It might have been the Salt Lake County mayor's race involving Ben McAdams one year, where the Salt Lake Tribune had a poll and they screwed up their sample big time, and they had to print a retraction. I think it showed McAdams was losing or something. That's ringing a bell with me, but that's what happens when you screw up when you don't get your sample right. So, if you want to believe this poll, you got to hope that they got their sample right, and then they weighted it correctly. Polling has gotten so much harder these days. The one guy that I trust in polling is Mike Noble of Noble Predictive Insights. He's out of Arizona. I say this, one, he's a friend of mine, but two, he absolutely nailed the 2024 election with his polls. Even the gubernatorial race with Phil Lyman as a write-in, he had Lyman at about 13% or maybe 12 to 13% in his final poll as a write-in, and Lyman got around 15%. So he absolutely nailed it. That's the one that I trust. He knows what he's doing. I spoke to him this week. He's thinking about he'll be putting a poll into the field here in Utah soon, and I'll be fascinated to see what those numbers are. I trust that he gets his sample correctly. Gabriel says, I just worry the candidates without a record of strategic behavior aren't going to be strategic if they win. You know, I mean, you've got there's not a lot of experience in this field. I mean, McAdams has the most experience, but that's because, you know, he took the opportunities when they came. And that's what a lot about politics. A lot about politics is timing. It's all timing. Think back to 2008 with Barack Obama. Everybody thought that was going to be Hillary Clinton's race to lose. Obama decided that he wanted to get into it, and it was timing because the opportunity was there. We've seen that here in Utah. Orrin Hatch stepped down. Mitt Romney was in the right place at the right time, timing, and he got elected. He only served one term. But, you know, a lot of it is about timing. So you need to think about that. Serald on YouTube says, the president signed an executive order instructing the USPS to mail ballots only to verified voters the federal government provides. Will Utah fight it? Well, first of all, the president has no authority to do that. So, you know, his executive order is about, it's worth the paper. It's worth less than the paper it's printed on. He has no constitutional authority to do that with the elections. But if you want an idea of where this is going to go, and this was fantastic, the White House posted their executive order that said that the Postal Service should only mail ballots to verified voters. And Lieutenant Governor Henderson posted this. I saw it on Threads. And I was unfamiliar with this part of her game, and I had to tip my cap. Henderson writes, when the latest executive order reminds you of that time when you were a senior in high school and you performed in a one-act play called Jack or the Submission by absurdist playwright Eugene Ionesco, and it was super weird and the script was full of nonsensical dialogue. As a theater geek, I was not expecting our lieutenant governor to reference Eugene Ionesco, and I thought that was fantastic. I was unfamiliar with her game. She's been pushing back on all of this. She's been pushing back on Mike Lee's SAVE Act, which they are desperate to get through. It's not going to pass. There's no way that thing passes because it's going to disenfranchise maybe 10% of the population. And you've got people in Congress, Republicans, saying the quiet part out loud. Did you catch Chip Roy? He was caught on a hot mic saying that he's had to stop talking about this because his chief of staff, a woman, got married, her name changed, and she had to go jump through a bunch of hoops just to get a driver's license because her name changed. Now imagine what's going to happen if the only forms of ID that you can use are a birth certificate or your passport. So he said that he has to stop talking about it, but he's one of the people pushing this hard. Somebody mentioned to Speaker Mike Johnson that this could possibly drop turnout for the election by 17%. And Johnson replied that, hey, that's good for us. All of this is about limiting the number of people who can vote because they know that they're in big trouble in this upcoming election. Now, a lot can change between now and November. But it looks like Republicans are in a lot of trouble. So let's see. Gabriel on YouTube says, as a statistician, the non-responsive bias from people not responding to surveys has been a major source of polling error over recent years. Just take a look at the past few jobs reports from BLS. Exactly. And I've spoken to pollsters, and that is one of the things, because people just don't answer their phone anymore. Looking at the methodology for this Data for Progress poll, they said they used SMS and web panel respondents. And I know the Data for Progress has had some success in the past doing that with their polling. But you're absolutely right, Gabriel. People do not answer their phones. It's harder and harder to get people to participate. And so there's a lot of it. Not only is the sample, but then they have to weight the sample so they can make it match the demographics of the state. Catherine Bealey on YouTube says, we might remember that McAdams supported Evan McMullin and got the Democrats not to field a candidate. We've talked about that before. I don't know how much that's going to play into this. I know that there is a lot of anger among some members of the Democratic base that they got the Democratic candidate to stand down in 2022 rather than field a candidate against Mike Lee so Evan McMullin could run unopposed as an independent. Bottom line is that worked. It did work. Evan McMullin came closer as a statewide. That was the closest statewide election we've had in this state in decades. If the Democrats had fielded a candidate, they would have gotten smoked by 20 points. Bottom line. So I know there's a lot of people who are upset that the Democrats did not field a candidate, and McAdams was one of the people who pushed for that. But in the end of the day, that was the closest statewide election that we've had in this state in decades. Yeah, McMullin didn't win, but I know for a fact there was a point with about 3 to 4 weeks to go in that race where Mike Lee's people were absolutely convinced he was going to lose. Mitchell Weiss, who has been very active in the Instagram chat tonight, we all know about your animosity towards McAdams. He says a loss is a loss is a loss, and McAdams sacrificed my family for it. Okay, well, what's better? Do you have a chance at taking out Mike Lee? And again, I know for a fact that Lee's people were convinced that he was going to lose with about 3 to 4 weeks left in the race. Why do you think he went on Tucker Carlson's show and begged Mitt Romney to endorse him? That's the reason why he did that. Because he was losing, or the data showed he was going to lose. A Democratic candidate would never have been in that situation. Not at all. Now, yes, Mike Lee, it was uniquely disliked. But again, Democratic candidate would not have had that opportunity. I can say that with certainty that a Democratic candidate would have lost to Mike Lee by at least 20 points. That's with that polling. So if you have any other thoughts on that, you want to talk about polling, you have any more questions about polling, let me know. Elliot Nutter, oh man. Okay, Elliot Nutter says, thoughts on Ben Rogers, who's Dr. Manhatva on Twitter, his impact on Utah politics. I've been seeing a lot of him lately. He likes to think that he has an impact on Utah politics, and I know that Senator Mike Lee has been was pushing him to run for Congress. Ben Rogers is absolutely sweaty to run for Congress. He wanted to run against Blake Moore this year, but he knows that if the signature path still exists, he's going to get smoked. Because again, he is an extreme candidate that people do not like. You remember the Cybertruck incident from 2024 where he got out and yelled at a bunch of kids because they got too close to his Cybertruck? Ben is making his name. His dad made all the money in the family. Ben is living off his family's money. And you know, he likes to think that he's got a lot of impact on Utah politics. Maybe in some corners of Twitter, but for the most part, he would absolutely love to run for Congress. In fact, I've seen him say that he would drop $1 million on Blake Moore, $1 million of his own money. That wouldn't be enough. Moore has got so many resources at his disposal as a member of House leadership. It wouldn't be enough. And if the signature path is still there, Ben Rogers is not going to beat Blake Moore. That's why he wants to get rid of it. That's his only reasonable path to victory. I don't know if you saw, but the Utah College Republicans are having an event with Nick Shirley, and some of the speakers are Ben Rogers is going to be speaking there, and so is Trevor Lee, and so is Trent Staggs. These people are just unserious. They are deeply unserious. And Kai Schwemmer, who is a groyper. is going to be speaking at this. And they know that, it's just a bunch of dorks getting together, because if you want to show up, you have to RSVP and then they'll tell you where the location is. They're just a bunch of dorks. It reminds me of that stupid Manosphere documentary on Netflix. The documentary was not stupid. The documentary was brilliant. People in the Manosphere are stupid. And if you have a chance, watch it, because these guys are just the saddest, most uninspiring dorks on the planet. It's just sad the way that they look at the world. And then I've been watching a little bit of that Channel 5 interview with Clavicular, who's that looks maxing kid, that 20-year-old kid who's trying to perfect his body. That kid is so broken. It is just sad. It's just, he's 20 years old and his worldview is so cooked. It's just terrible. Anyway, just a bunch of dorks. Mike Harvey says, God, that shit was so sad. He's smart too. I'm assuming you're talking about Clavicular. It was really sad. I mean, right off the bat, they have the clip where the guy asks him about going on a date with a woman to a bowling alley. And he said, well, if you're not live streaming it, what's the point? And the interviewer says, maybe to have a connection with somebody? Maybe to create a real connection with someone, and he just couldn't process that. That's not how he sees the world, and he's only 20, and I'm really sad for him. These guys like Manhatva and Nick Shirley and Trevor Lee and the rest of my fan club over on X, not only are they a bunch of really sad dorks, but their takes, their opinions are so stupid. They're just dumb. But they're in this echo chamber over there where they all pat each other on the back. Anyway, enough talking about that. We've got other stuff to talk about here. Dank on YouTube says, I'm anxiously awaiting to hear about how the Utah legislature is retaliating after the Prop 4 repeal failed to make the ballot. They've got plenty of time now. We were having a little bit of this discussion on our subscriber-only Discord earlier this week. I think that they're going to redraw the maps. I think that this map we have here for 2026 will not be the map that we have in 2028. And the reason why, I believe that their argument is going to be that this map was imposed by the judge, and then they're going to take the opportunity to redraw the map either under the rules of Prop 4, and then you'll get something that looks like they're closer to their Option C map that they tried to pass earlier this year, or they're hoping that this forthcoming constitutional amendment that they're planning to put on the ballot that will allow them to override any, to repeal any citizen-passed initiative. They want to put that on the ballot. I don't know if that passes, but if it does, Prop 4 will be immediately repealed. But they'll do something, and I'm convinced that they're going to redraw these maps for 2028. I think we're going to have a different map for 2026, a different map for 2028. Maybe that map stays in place for 2030, and then we'll have new maps again in 2032, and probably 5 congressional districts, not 4, because the way that our population is growing, we're probably going to get that 5th district. We barely missed out on one for this 10-year cycle. So that's what I think is going to happen. They're going to end up redrawing the maps at some point. Brent Summers on YouTube says, I think every time a Democrat wins a congressional seat, they'll redraw the map until a Republican wins it. That's what they've done in these last couple of redistricting cycles. You will hear them. I've heard Republicans say that this current map is the most gerrymandered map in Utah history. 2011 Actually, the 2001 congressional map would like a word. That was back when we had 3 congressional districts, not 4. Jim Matheson was a Democrat in Congress. He had gotten elected in 1998. I believe it was in 1998. And when the 2022 election rolled around, we had a brand new map. And the Wall Street Journal at the time called the district that they drew for Matheson in 2001 the most gerrymandered district in the country. They drew it specifically to try to knock Jim Matheson out of office. And it didn't work. he kept getting reelected, and it didn't help that he had a very close reelection race against John Swallow. That was one of the tensest election nights I've ever been a part of. I was at Republican headquarters that night when I was covering the election for KSL Radio. And it just kept going on and on and on. We were just waiting and waiting and waiting. And the late Dan Jones was the election analyst for KSL at the time. And he kept looking at the numbers as they came in the election returns. And finally, probably around, I think it was 1 o'clock in the morning, he finally turned to our news director and said, it's Matheson. We called it for Matheson, but it took us forever. And then it stretched out for a few days beyond that. That was a very close election. And then after that, Matheson had much easier re-election bids until they redrew the maps in 2011 when he got the 4th district again to try to draw him out of existence. He was in he was in the 2nd congressional district, and then he jumped to the 4th. Because then they didn't expect that. They were again trying to gerrymander him out. So when you hear Republicans saying that this is the most gerrymandered map in Utah's history, it's not even close. Go back and look at 2001. That one was specifically drawn to get rid of Jim Matheson. Debbie C. on Instagram says, when will the special session be? Any idea? I don't think we'll see it until May. Maybe it might not be until after the primary elections. They've got some time. They still have to do the publication rule, which is one of the reasons why that amendment got knocked off the ballot in 2024. They missed the publication deadline. So I suspect it'll be before August. I don't think they start interim meetings until May, though. So it could be in May. I'll have to look at that schedule, but yeah, it'll be around the time of an interim day. Michael Smaldon on TikTok, and this is a great question. He says, how would Prop 4 impact local districts? Wouldn't fair maps include state races? This whole panic about Prop 4, this whole Republican fight over Prop 4, it's not about the congressional districts. It is a little bit, but it's mostly about the legislative districts. Because if you take that ability out of their hands, that is an existential threat to a lot of Republican lawmakers up there. Now, it's not having an independent commission draw the legislative maps is not going to lead to a Democratic majority. We are a Republican state. You are going to have a Republican majority, but it's going to have more competitive races, which is something we don't have a lot of right now. There's a lot of really safe Republican seats. And putting it in the hands of an independent commission who, one, are not allowed to use partisan data to draw the maps, and two, cannot consider where incumbents live when they draw these maps. They have to draw them blind. That could be an existential threat to the Republican supermajority. Because, and I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it, if the Republicans lose their supermajority on the Hill, they will have to govern a hell of a lot differently than they do right now. Because the governor's veto actually means something at that point. They might actually have to negotiate or bring Democrats into discussions when they're trying to set policy. Because remember, 2/3 in both the House and the Senate, when you pass a bill with 2/3, it not only is veto proof, it's referendum proof. You can't do a referendum to put something on the ballot. That's what they did with school vouchers. The first time they passed school vouchers back in 2007, they didn't get 2/3 in both the House and the Senate. It was open for a referendum. It went on the ballot. People voted it down. They bring vouchers back under the Utah Fits All Scholarship, and they made damn sure that they had 2/3 in the House and the Senate when they passed it, so it couldn't be up for a referendum and voters couldn't do anything about it. You take that away from them, you take that tool away, and things get a lot different. You're not going to get so many extreme pieces of legislation. You will have extreme legislation, but having an independent commission, having an independent body draw these lines would be, it is an existential threat to a lot of the Republican, it's an existential threat to the Republican super majority up there. It really is. It's not guaranteed, but you would have more competitive races, which, would be a good thing in my opinion, I guess. Gabriel on YouTube says, even if they put Prop 4 of the amendment on the ballot, who's to say it actually gets overturned by voters? Yeah, I don't know if voters have the appetite to pass this amendment. That's one of the reasons why they wanted to put this repeal of Prop 4 on the ballot. Because they thought it would bring Republicans out to vote, and then Republicans would vote for this constitutional amendment. It was a twofer. It's the exact reason why they repealed the HB 267, the anti-union law, which was going to be on the ballot as well for a referendum. They did not want a bunch of angry voters showing up to vote down this repeal of Prop 4 or that constitutional amendment. They want to get their voters, not angry voters. But I don't know if there's a lot of appetite to give the legislature more power. I don't know if that appetite's out there. I haven't seen any polling, but given the environment, given the way things are right now, I don't know if that appetite is there. But who's to say? I know that they're going to try. I know that's one thing that they are going to try. Let's see. I wanted to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to bring this up in my screen share here. We should not have any more echoing audio, but I looked at, so this took me a lot. It was pretty hard for me to do. But what I did was I took the congressional map that they passed in 2021. I took the new map that was in place for this, and then I went and looked at the census blocks from 2020, which they used to draw the 2021 map. Now I say these are voters, but this is the population shift, but you get an idea of where things move, and the flow from the old districts into the new districts. And this is one of the reasons why I think Celeste Maloy could be in trouble in 2026, especially against Phil Lyman. Because if you look at her old district, this right here is her old district. Now, where did the population, the voters from the old CD2, which Maloy represents, into her new district, which is the new CD3? Well, a big chunk of them right here, they went into into new CD1. About 344,000 went into CD1. Some of them went into Blake Moore's district, about 131,000. And then about 261,000 went from the old CD2 into the new CD3, where she's running now. That's about 40%. So 60% of people in the new CD3 have never seen her name on the ballot. The person who benefited the most was Blake Moore. This was his old district, this is his new district, and a huge chunk of them, like over 70%, shifted from CD1 into the new CD2. Moore's in good shape. Where did the voters in CD1 come from? Well, a big chunk of them came from CD4, CD2. This is what happens when you split Salt Lake County up into 4 pieces. But you can see the flow of the population from one congressional district to the other. And the thing about Maloy makes sense. This is the old map. This was her old map. This is her new map. And so she's losing all of this over here. She's lost all of these counties. And she's adding in San Juan County, over here into the Wasatch Back, Summit County, Uinta Basin. Different set of voters. This is why I think Phil Lyman has a serious chance of knocking her off. And she barely won her reelection bid in 2024 against Colby Jenkins. She barely won that. I think she ended up with, she barely got out of convention. She did not collect signatures. Neither did Jenkins. Barely got out of convention. Jenkins got an endorsement from Mike Lee, which almost gave him the nomination at convention. And then the race was so close in the primary and went to a recount. So that's why I think she's in trouble. Blake Moore, this is the old map right here. CD1 to CD2, very similar. He retains a lot of those voters. And this is one of the reasons why I think that, he's in good shape against Carrie Ann Lisenby. You're seeing Lisenby supporters trying to make hay about the fact that Moore doesn't live in the district. He didn't live in the district before. He didn't live in CD1 when he was first elected to it in 2020. He lives in CD1 now, the new CD1, but he didn't live there before. But that hasn't been an issue for people in Utah, because we've had a number of people not live in the district where they represent. So I don't know how potent that argument is. I think the more potent argument, and the one that they're really trying to make with this, is that he worked with the original Better Boundaries and tried to get and helped get that on the ballot back in 2018, the original Prop 4. He helped get that on the ballot, and that, so he's partially responsible for this new map. And they're trying to lean into that. There's not much overlap between Kennedy's old district, which is over here 3, and the new district 4. Like, I laid these on top of each other trying to figure it out. It is a very small part right in this area that has the overlap. And so he doesn't retain much of his old district either. But he doesn't have as strong of a Republican opponent as Maloy does. But that's one of the reasons why I think Maloy could be in trouble. From this primary challenge from Phil Lyman. And she knows she could be in trouble, because the moment he announced he was running, she started to collect signatures. And she better hope that works out for her. Elliot Nutter says, petty/OCD, but the top of the map should be 1. They need to rename those 2 districts. I hear you. I hear you. But, you've got 1 right in the center because it is the donut hole. And then it goes, counterclockwise around the state. No, I guess, no, it would go clockwise around the state. I think that's the reason why they did it. Gabriel says this graph makes it really clear why Moore immediately started running in CD2. Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody would have challenged him for that among the current delegation. I reported before, and I have it on pretty good authority, that if Burgess Owens had not stepped down, he does live in CD4, in the new CD4. But if he had not decided to retire, not run for another term, Kennedy was getting ready to launch a primary bid against Maloy because they both live in that new 3rd congressional district. We need to talk a little bit about, if you want to, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Colorado's conversion therapy ban partially. It wasn't a complete, the lawsuit wasn't a complete challenge of the ban. It was on the implementation of the ban. Much like about 20 other states, about half the states have implemented bans on conversion therapy, which is a discredited type of therapy that says you can change somebody's sexual orientation, their gender identity. It's ineffective. A lot of the treatments are pretty cruel, and that's why they've been banned in a lot of states. Colorado's conversion therapy ban said that you could not, it was talk therapy, and you couldn't use talk therapy to try to change somebody's orientation. A counselor sued. She was assisted by the right-wing group Alliance Defending Freedom. They do a lot of lawsuits. They go out and find litigants to file these lawsuits against these laws on religious basis, and she claimed that it was a violation of her free speech rights because it was viewpoint discrimination. That's a violation of the First Amendment. The government cannot discriminate based on viewpoint. The ruling is kind of baffling. I think Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, in her dissent, got it right, in which she said government puts regulations on a lot of medical treatments. They regulate a lot of medical treatments, and this one, there's no proof at all that conversion therapy works. So what are we doing here? But now Colorado can go back to the drawing board. They're going to have to make some changes, but everyone immediately started thinking about what's going to happen with Utah's ban on conversion therapy, because Utah banned conversion therapy back in 2023. And I spoke with Marina Lowe of Equality Utah today. They negotiated this ban on conversion therapy, and it passed both houses unanimously in 2023. And what she said is that Utah's ban would probably hold up with this kind of scrutiny because a therapist cannot go into it with a predetermined outcome. It's all based on intent. What is the intent of the therapist? If the therapist cannot have the intent to change somebody's sexual orientation or their gender identity, but it does leave open where they can talk about other therapies, other treatments. Just so long as you don't discriminate, you don't go in with an intent, with a predetermined outcome in part of therapy. So I thought that was interesting. Gabriel on YouTube says, I was surprised to see the decision was 8-1. I was as well. Yeah, I was really surprised. Elliot Nutter, you're absolutely right here. He says, I saw a video saying it was focusing on the talk aspect. The other versions can still be banned. Yes, the other stuff is still banned. This is just all about the talk therapy. Colorado has a chance to go back and change this. Colorado has a chance to go back and address the court's concerns. They didn't strike down the whole law, just the talk therapy part of it. I don't suspect there's going to be any lawsuits against Utah's conversion therapy ban anytime soon, but I could be wrong. Because there might be a well-funded group out there just itching to come after Utah's ban. Haroldon on TikTok says, are there signs of weariness of wackadoodle candidates like Lyman among Republicans? Not at the convention level. They really like these very conservative candidates, and their outrage about the signature path is very selective, because Phil is getting signatures, and I know that he's turned in a bunch of packets. I've heard from people who have been at the clerks turning in their own packets, and they saw Phil's team come in with a bunch of packets. So it's not surprising at all. But what is surprising is just this selective outrage when it comes to the signature gathering path, because like Davis County Republicans, they have been leaning hard on candidates to not take the signature route. They've been pushing really hard, saying that, the Davis County Republican Party, their values are about the caucus and convention system, and not the signature gathering path. But then all of a sudden, when it's convenient for one of their own, like Phil Lyman, to use the signature gathering path to get on the ballot, they're all for it. Funny how that works out. Things to watch for this week. On Friday, that is the deadline for candidates in who will have their races decided at a number of county conventions, specifically Davis County, Salt Lake County. The deadline for them to turn in their signature packets is this Friday. So if there are candidates whose race is only in Salt Lake County and they are collecting signatures, their deadline is this Friday to turn in their signature packets. As we said earlier in the broadcast, Bob Stevenson, who is challenging Trevor Lee for the Republican nomination in House District 16, he, as of today, has enough signatures to appear on the ballot. So he is qualified for the primary ballot. He will be in the primary, and he cannot be eliminated at convention. I have heard some anecdotal evidence from people who were at the Davis County caucus meetings that Representative Lee did not have a very good night at the caucus meetings. He had a really hard time getting delegates to support him at the caucus meetings earlier this month. It is still the last day of March, so I can still say earlier this month. So that's going to be a fascinating race to watch at the Davis County Convention. That is coming up, I believe, on the 18th. Yeah, that's the 18th of April. Salt Lake and Davis County are the same day. And then the week after that is the state convention. The Republicans are going to be down at Utah Valley University. Democrats are going to be at Jordan High School. And I'm still trying to decide which convention I'm going to go to. Let's see. Serald on YouTube says, I've heard Gen Z is getting tired of MAGA at CPAC, but that may just be gossip. That's what I've heard too. I've heard that CPAC was not very well attended this year. That's the Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington, D.C. That's been going on for a number of years. It's usually like the who's who of the conservative movement. I heard it was not very well attended this year. Very low energy. Wasn't the event that it has been in the past. And I don't know if that's just fatigue with with MAGA. I'm not sure what that's about, but it is significant to look at that. And that's one of the things that a lot of people talk about. They talk about voter enthusiasm. And as we've seen in all of these special elections so far, Democrats are jacked up to vote. And it's not just Democrats, because Democrats are winning in solidly Republican seats for these special elections. And in a lot of cases, you're seeing Republicans cross over to vote for them, which is significant. And so there's a lot of voter enthusiasm. And again, that's part of the reason why President Trump issues this executive order saying that he's going to order the Postal Service to only deliver mail-in ballots to voters on their approved list or their verified list. That's clearly unconstitutional. He does not have that authority. But he's going to try. That is one of the reasons why Senator Mike Lee is so desperate to pass his voter suppression act known as the SAVE Act. They're seeing what is happening on the landscape. And that's one of the reasons why they're so desperate to do it. Last thing we have here tonight, Elliot Nutter says, how did your hearing for a press pass go, or is that just hush hush? We've talked about that before. Last month, a couple of weeks ago, we had oral arguments in front of the 10th Circuit Court in Denver on my appeal. A judge here in Utah dismissed my case. We believe he got it wrong. We argued the appeal. My lawyers felt very good about how that hearing went. They were very, very optimistic after that hearing. They think it went our way. We only need to get 2 of the 3 judges on the panel to vote to overturn the judge's decision. I am hoping that if they do that, I'm hoping, one, they overturn the ruling, and this court usually takes about 2 to 3 months to issue a decision, so we're just in the waiting period now. I'm hoping that if they do overturn this decision to dismiss it, one, they either assign it to a new judge here in Utah, or they send it to another court in the circuit. One of the things that happened when I initially filed my lawsuit, we had a bunch of judges recuse themselves, a bunch of federal judges, simply because of conflicts of interest with the legislature. I was suing the legislature, and they all had a conflict. What they should have done initially is sent this to another court in the 10th Circuit, just because of all of the conflicts here in Utah. I'm hoping that they either assign it to a new judge, or they will, and that usually happens. They'll assign it to a new judge, or they'll send it to another court in the circuit, where I think that we can get a much less, I guess, slanted hearing of our case, because these oral arguments at the 10th Circuit were the first chance that we had to argue the merits of the case. That the legislature was engaging in viewpoint discrimination. So fingers crossed. I'm hoping that they overturn this, they reverse the decision, and in doing so, they also order the legislature to give me a press pass while the rest of this plays out. So we're hoping to do that. But whatever happens, I'm thinking about I might go up to the Davis County Republican Convention, because I know a lot of the lawmakers up there. They haven't seen me in a while because I haven't been able to get into their press conferences, and I suspect that they miss me. I think that they miss me. I think they miss my smiling face, and so I think I want to go up there and really just connect with people like Senate President Stuart Adams and Todd Weiler and others, because I really think that they miss my bright personality and my shining face. So I'm thinking about heading up there for that. Anyway, that's probably going to do it for this evening. I appreciate everyone tuning in. Thank you so much for your eyeballs and your attention and your questions. My email's on the screen. If you have any questions, if you want to ask me something offline, feel free to do that. You have all of my social media handles as well. You can send me a DM on any social media. I appreciate that as well. And you can go to my website, utahpolitics.news. I publish news stories. I try to publish news story every day. Try to keep you informed, try to break down what's happening in Utah politics. Most of my journalism is free, but if you value what I do, you can throw me a couple of bucks in the tip jar, or you can, become a paying subscriber. Every little bit it helps. I am an independent journalist. I don't have any corporations. I'm not owned by a corporation. I don't have a billionaire telling me what to do. I'm doing this all by my lonesome, trying to keep you informed, trying to do my part for this democracy, to uphold this democracy that frankly is under a lot of threat, and I really, really cherish it, and I want it to persist long after I'm gone. So anyway, thank you so much for your time and your attention this evening. And we might do another one of these this week. If not, we'll be back around the same time next week. But thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Remember, utahpolitics.news is my website. Have a great evening, and we'll talk to you again soon.